Happy ever after. I had recently used up my last diaper and became very desperate. Being penniless, I could not afford to buy any new ones at that moment in time. Then I remembered that I still had some of my cousin's pull-ups. Quickly I ran downstairs as fast as I could and found them in the guest bedroom closet. They were girls' pull-ups, so they were pink and had Disney princesses on them, which I found attractive and cute. Following this, I went up to my bedroom and found the smallest t-shirt I could fit into. I remembered we still had some baby bottles from when my uncle and his son were living with us. So I went back downstairs, grabbed a bottle and also found a binky. I poured some milk into the bottle, grabbed my pacifier and went back upstairs. Once there, drank the milk from the bottle. When I had finished the milk, and after all the running up and down the stairs, I was very sleepy. Without any further thoughts, I popped the binky into my mouth and immediately fell asleep. I woke up sometime later to find my mom hovering over me. She was just kind of smiling but not saying anything at all. Then suddenly, she finally said, "Stay in bed and little one and don't you move." She came back some 2 minutes later holding another bottle. She gave me the bottle and told me that she was going out. She further told me that I was to stay in bed until she got home. I drank the bottle of warm milk, and for a while I did as she told me to. However, I soon became restless. Not thinking of the consequence of not doing what Mommy had told me, I got out of bed. For a while, I played a few games on my little Xbox. When Mommy did get home, she came upstairs with quite a few grocery bags. I didn't know what they contained, but I started to get a little scared. She came into my bedroom and had me get out of bed. Up until then, I had not noticed I had used the pull-up that night to do toilets. However, Mommy was no fool. She certainly knew what I had done. She pulled them down, took off my shirt, and led me to the bath. Already, she had prepared for me, which had some of my cousin's bath toys in it. After the bath, she took me to my uncle's old bedroom, which still had my cousin's changing table and crib in, as well as an old wooden rocking chair. Because I had been naughty, she sat in the rocking chair, put me over her knee, and spanked me when I started crying. Whilst Mommy was spanking me, I dropped my pacifier. Mommy stopped spanking me, just long enough to pop it back into my mouth. She then continued to spank me, until I was my bot stung, and her own hand hurt. When the spanking was over, she put me up onto the changing table. There put a fresh diaper on me and one of her own white tees. She then put me into the crib with some baby toys she had bought at the store. I was left in the crib all day to play with the toys. However, I eventually got bored. After all, there is only so much fun you can have with a baby's rattle and some blocks. I tossed the toys out of the crib to make more room, and then took a nap. This time I woke to not only find my mommy over me but my auntie and my 3 cousins. I was so humiliated by being seen by my auntie and 3 cousins that I hid my head in my hands. In my sleep, I had wet my diapers again, as well as one of mommy's t-shirts. Back on the changing table, I went, whilst my diapers were changed in front of my aunties and cousins. I was then brought downstairs and put into a booster seat that was way too small for me. However, I was squeezed into it, strapped in. Once in the chair, I spoon-fed 5 jars of baby food. After that, it was back upstairs into the crib with a bottle and I was to be put to bed. I drank the bottle and laid in the crib for what seemed like hours, after which I finally fell asleep. I was awoken the next day, again wearing a wet diaper. Again I was bathed, and then brought downstairs, where I played with baby's toys, and watched shows like Sesame Street and Barney Rubble all day long. I was taken for a nap between 1 and 4 in the afternoon. Then I was awoken and watched Barney for another hour until I was given dinner. Once again, dinner consisted of 5 jars of baby food. Once again, after dinner, I got to watch another hour of television, then I was put to bed at 6 p.m. This went on for about 3 days, then on the 4th day, something a little different happened. I was stuck in the crib with the door closed, so I had no idea what was really going on. I was eventually changed, which by now was definitely needed, as my diaper was about to leak. I was then brought down for dinner. When we got to the kitchen, I noticed a new high chair that fit me quite comfortably. I had a bib put on me that was baby blue with baby embroidered in light pink. After my dinner, I was brought upstairs, and instead of going to my new room, I was brought to my old room. If my parkie had not been tied around my head with a piece of ribbon, it surely would have fallen out. My room had been painted pink, had a strip of Care Bear wallpaper in the center, all the way around. It also had a big Winnie the Pooh rug. My new room also contained an adult-sized crib and a large changing table, which was stocked with hundreds of Bambino diapers. There was also a little girl-style dresser that contained even more diapers, onuses, cloth diapers, plastic pants, and some babyish pajamas. I noticed the open closet, and in it were dozens of little girl party dresses. I was put onto the changing table, had my diaper changed, and put into one of the dresses. This dress was pink and baby blue, and had a ribbon that tied into a huge bow in the back. I was brought downstairs again and played by myself for a little while. My mom eventually came down and informed me that we would be going to the park to play. She went on to put an adult baby harness on me, then she took me to the car and put me in the new car seat. We drove to the local park. Being at the park was potentially embarrassing, being dressed in such a manner. So many people from my school went there to the skate park. I was forced to play on the slides with the children there. Then I was pushed on the swings until my mom noticed my waddle. Mommy decided, there and then, it was time for a diaper change. I was brought to the ladies' restroom and put on the changing table there. It wasn't so bad as it got me away from prying eyes. However, this respite was soon to end, when one of the girls from my school class came in. I tried to hide my face, but it was no use, she had already seen me, and burst into laughter. The only thing I could do was hope that she would forget about it before we returned to school from winter break. My mommy finished changing me, and took me as close as she could to the skate park. This caused everyone to stop, point, and laugh at me. They followed our movements all the way to the car and watched me get put into my car seat. When we got home, I could not help myself and burst into tears. The Sunday before I was scheduled to go back to school, I asked Mommy if I could have my boy clothes back for school the next day. Her reply came with a resounding no. She went on to tell me that I had two choices. I could either go to school dressed in baby diapers, or I could be homeschooled for the rest of the year. I choose to be homeschooled, as I did not wish for the humiliation of having to go back to day school. However, I was still to be taken to the park on a daily basis, for exercise. This was mainly to keep the fat from the baby food off, instead of embarrassing me. On the days my mom had to work, I was brought to my aunt and uncles and would be taken care of by my cousin's nanny. The first few times my cousins were relentless in their teasing. However, after a few good spankings, the teasing ceased. I was homeschooled and brought to the nanny every day. I am still nannied to this day. I thoroughly enjoy every minute of it. Melissa and Doug. Melissa came home from work that evening, tired right down to her bones and every muscle aching. Work week officially over. Now it was time to scream. Melissa wanted to officially scream. The tiny one-bedroom apartment was a mess. It was a mess when she'd left. It was worse now, soda and beer cans everywhere, by the couch, on the coffee table, left up on bookshelves, on the TV stand. the ones that were empty were dented and crushed. Fast food wrappers rolled around the floor in the fan-manufactured breeze and pizza boxes dotted the carpet. If she hadn't just gulped fresh air, Melissa might not have recognized the distinct odor of unwashed clothes. She high-stepped over cans and garbage to the washer and dryer and opened the laundry closet doors. A basket full of dirty clothes had been propped up on top. Laundry was in the washer, but it was wet and spoiled. This was the load she'd started this morning, just before leaving for work. Doug. Her boyfriend came tramping out of the bedroom. He looked like he'd just gotten out of bed. His scraggly dark hair tumbled over his face in places even as parts of it stuck out at strange angles in the back. He definitely needed a shave. Doug was the kind of man who just couldn't grow a beard and his facial hair only came out in ugly and scraggly little patches. From 3 feet away, Melissa could tell Doug had been smoking pot. Sorry, he let out a yawn. I was taking a nap. You were supposed to be cleaning up, Melissa said. Doug waved it off. I will. Don't worry about it. That's what he'd said yesterday. And the day before. And the day before that. Did you at least look for a job? Yeah, Doug stuttered. I did. No interviews lined up yet, but I put my resume everywhere. Melissa knew it was a lie. Nevertheless, she persisted. Yeah. Like where? Doug huffed. One of his tells. You know. Everywhere. Retail mostly. Places that don't require experience. Entry-level jobs. That kind of thing. Oh sure. That kind of thing. The bullshit kind of thing. It must have shown on Melissa's face. You okay, babe? Something inside Melissa snapped just then. Yeah, she said. It was her turn to lie. Excuse me for a couple of minutes. Okay. Melissa walked back out into the parking lot. The first thing she did was bury her face into her hands and scream into them until the tears started to leak out. Why? Why did she have to be in love with such a loser? It was just endless fucking frustration. Doug wasn't always like this. He used to be charming and energetic and motivated. But Doug was a bottle rocket. He'd charge headfirst into something, full of big ideas and great ambitions, and then something would deter him, or distract him, and he'd go veering way off course, and then just peter out. Some said that Doug had undiagnosed ADHD. Lots of energy, no focus. Others thought he was an adult gifted kid, and he'd gotten by on his own natural talent, and he was talented, for so long that he never really learned how to work hard for something. But really, Melissa felt, Doug was really just a big kid, and not in the good or fun way. He'd throw his heart and soul into something for a few days, like a kid getting new toys on Christmas, and then be bored and listless again immediately afterwards. Laying around the house, drinking sugar and booze, and eating like he was still a teenager, and cleaning house like he still had his mother to pick up after him and wipe his ass. It was then that she knew what she had to do. Taking her cell phone, she dialed an old college friend of hers, one who lived nearby and she'd kept in close touch with, and one whose career had taken her far away from a career in dentistry. It went straight to voicemail. Damn it. Hello, thank you for calling Mommy V. If you'd like to schedule a recording session Melissa hung up. Damn it. This was not the sort of thing she wanted to leave on a voicemail. Her phone buzzed just a second later. Veronica. Melissa said, picking up the phone. Melissa? What's up? Remember that thing we talked about? The thing about if and when I was ready for it. There was a brief pause as Veronica chewed on her lip from the other end of the line. You want to be one of my models? Even though her friend couldn't see her face, Melissa was shaking her head. No, she said. Well, kinda. It's complicated. How complicated? Let's just say that I need your help. and I think I have an idea that might be beneficial to both of us. Melissa gritted her teeth. But I'd definitely need your help at first, financially. She explained her plan. By the time Melissa was explaining her idea, Veronica was laughing so hard. No, stop. Stop. I'm in. Consider me an investor and supplier. Melissa said her goodbyes and had her tears replaced with a devious smirk. Everything okay, babe? Doug asked her when she came back in not quite 10 minutes after she'd left. Yeah, Melissa said. Just had some last-minute calls I had to make to the office. Do you want to do something tomorrow? I'm starting to feel some cabin fever is all. Been close to a month since I've been somewhere besides the office or home. Her boyfriend looked around at the pile of junk that he'd littered all around the apartment. I mean, yeah. I just thought we'd spend part of tomorrow cleaning up. If not for her phone call, Melissa would be bristling right now. We'd clean it up. Doug had made 99% of the mess and couldn't be bothered to learn to cook, or bring garbage to the dumpster, but we'd clean it up. If she was having second thoughts, she wasn't anymore. It can wait. Let's order pizza and just watch some TV. They made love that night. It was a little last treat to both of them. In some regards, she was punishing herself as much as him. He didn't deserve this, but she did. He didn't deserve what was going to happen to him tomorrow morning, either. But that afternoon and evening, oh, he'd have it all coming. It was the best day that Doug could remember in a long time. It wasn't a trip to Disney or nothing, but it was still really fucking good. He was a little annoyed at first that Melissa woke him up early, but then she took him out. They'd had a great breakfast, bottomless pancakes and iced sugary coffee. Then they'd gone to see an early matinee. Lots of explosions and then stopped at a sushi place for lunch. And Melissa had paid for it all. She'd paid for it all normally, true, but she'd specifically asked for the check each time, no more awkward stares from waitresses. It was when they'd gotten home that things really kicked into high gear. Put this on. Melissa dangled a frilly black blindfold in front of him on. I want to show you something. Doug knew that tone. Yes, please. Thank you very much. Where'd you get that? Doug asked. His girlfriend was playful and really good in bed, last night being a prime example, but he'd never have described her as kinky. Still, first time for everything. Just put it on, silly. How are you gonna be able to show me something if my eyes are covered up, he said cheekily. That got him a light smack in the arm. That only made him grin. He pictured his little minx in something lacy, or leathery. Maybe a cute little maid's outfit with a thong peeking out whenever she. Cleaning the house was going to be fun. Doug laid naked on the bed, blindfolded and cuffed at both hands and feet, unable to contain the shit-eating grin plastered all over his face. It was like something out of a porno. Ooh, maybe this is why this was happening. Maybe Melissa had found the porn files on his laptop. She knew he had a naughty side and was looking to indulge it. He'd allowed himself to be guided to the bed, completely titillated by the sensory deprivation. For some reason, the apartment smelled different, too. Like fresh perfume, lavender. I got a cleaning crew to come help while we were out. They'd done a good job. The place had never smelled this good before. He tried to help undress himself, but had only got a slap on the wrist, one that actually hurt a little bit. No. Let me do it for you, baby, she whispered. Oh. That certainly did something to him. Patience, baby. Melissa said. All good things to those who wait. I want to get this juiced right. Doug squirmed on the bed. His stomach gurgled, and he felt a not-so-little cramp. The morning coffee and lunchtime sushi were finally starting to do their work. Speaking of butt stuff, there was definitely a bullet in the chamber, so to speak. Determined not to ruin this for himself, Doug clenched a little. Melissa was a big girl and knew how to take care of herself. Almost ready, Melissa told him. He heard a strange, yet oddly familiar crinkling sound. Eerily familiar. You opening something up? He asked. Okay, baby, Melissa said, her voice cooing the way women do when they're talking to a small child. Now, you can look. The blindfold was torn away from his eyes. What Doug saw made his own personal error 404 screen blip up in his brain. Melissa had changed her clothes, but she wouldn't be wearing anything that Doug would have expected to see in a porn movie. Her skinny jeans and tight t-shirt had been traded in for a modest dress, the kind that people wore to church on Sunday. She'd taken out her contacts and put on her glasses. Yeah, she was pretty, just not hot. As soon as his brain registered what she was wearing, his eyes finally realized what she was doing. There was a camera set up in the bedroom, pointed right at him. Hold still, baby. Whether out of a physical inability or a mental overload, Doug did stay still. He stayed still enough to watch in wide-eyed horror and shrieked as Melissa pulled a diaper up Beto. A diaper. A real diaper. Not like a Depends or whatever those old farts wore in nursing homes. This one had cartoons on the front. Little cartoon meteors decorated the crotch, with a green triceratops standing in profile on the top of the waistband. It was thick, too. Thick enough that even without the chastity device, Doug was sure he'd be unable to feel himself through the padding. Other than the plastic backing, it looked exactly like the type of diaper an actual baby might wear. A quick glance to the dresser behind the camera, and Doug realized that there were plenty more where that one had come. He used his tongue to push the bulbous pacifier, and it was a pacifier, out of his mouth. Melissa glowered at him as she finished taping the ridiculous thing on him. It's mommy to you, little boy, she scolded him. And no cursing. You get one warning. Doug laughed. Actually laughed. Whack. Melissa had a paddle nearby. Her blow smacked the outside of his hip. It stung. A lot. Bad baby. Whack. That one felt like it might actually leave a bruise. Bad baby. Ow wow, I am sorry. Whack. Yeah. Definitely a bruise. Her voice lowered back down. You're sorry, who? I am sorry, Melissa. Whack. Say it right, baby boy. She was even scarier now that she wasn't yelling. Say my name. Tears of pain were already starting to form in Doug's eyes. Mommy, your name is Mommy. She put down the paddle and walked over to his head. She gave him a kiss on the forehead. Good baby. Melissa, why are you dash? Whack. That one had been bare-handed but it still hurt. Mommy, why are you doing this? In answer, she went back over to the dresser where the extra diapers, yep, those were diapers all right, a bottle of baby powder, wipes, and some lotion were all placed. Beside them was a baby bottle filled with clear liquid. He'd hoped it was just water. She slid on the bed next to him. Open up. Having little choice, he did as he was told. It was water all right. Mostly. It had kind of a weird and funny taste to it. You drink this all gone, and I'll explain. Doug started to gulp it down, just to get it over with. Gently. Mommy doesn't want her little baby getting a tummy ache. He slowed it down to a sip. He'd been cowed so easily. He never thought this would be possible. But here he was being force-fed a bottle on threat of spanking, right after his girlfriend had diapered him. She must have seen the blush rising to his cheeks at the thought of his predicament. No need to be embarrassed, she told him. You're just sippin' on your BABA like all good babies do. Doug tried to ask why, but he only got out some gurgles for his trouble, as Melissa squeezed the bottle a bit more the moment he started trying to talk. His tummy gurgled, starting to feel overfull. Something else was feeling overfull. Still, she clearly understood what he was asking. "I've just been thinking," she said gently, a hint of malice and mischief in her eyes. "I've been treating you all wrong these last couple of months. You don't go to work. You don't clean up after yourself. You don't pay for anything. You just eat and drink and sleep all day. Does that sound like boyfriend material to you, Dougie?" Doug couldn't argue, and not just because he wasn't quite halfway done. Another cramp hit him. "This might not be all water. So I'm gonna treat you the way you've been acting," she continued. "Like my little baby boy." She booped him on the nose, playfully. His stomach was really starting to hurt. His body was telling him something, but Doug really didn't want to listen. "No." Finally, he finished, and she took the baby bottle out of his mouth. Whether it was spiked or not, the bottle was doing a number on him. His stomach was hurting and he desperately needed to void his bowels. But no. Not in his pants. Not in a diaper. Not like this. "Why the cage?" he groaned. Melissa pinched his cheek. "Because you've been a bad baby. Mommy had to take away her little boy's favorite toy." She gave him a kiss full on the lips. "Naughty whittle baby." The slacker grimaced and groaned. "Why the camera?" "Oh, you noticed that?" Melissa said in a squeaky high voice. "That's one of the ways to make sure you cooperate and be a good baby. If you try and leave or misbehave, and act like a big strong man," she giggled, "I'll have something to put on the internet, and everyone will know just what an adorable whittle boy you are." Damn. She had him dead to rights. Any fight he might have had went to cower in the back corner of his mind. Still, he did struggle against his bonds. "Oh, I know what that means." She almost crowed. She put a hand on his stomach. "Be a good baby," she whispered. "Use your diaper." He wouldn't. He couldn't. He mustn't. Her hand thrust down into his gut. Too late. His body started to take over, rude noises erupting out of him as sloppy wet farts, and more than farts began to leak out his backside. "No," he screamed. He struggled, he whimpered. He clenched his cheeks and held his breath and slammed his body down against the mattress, trying to use basic physics to counter his treacherous biology. But his new mommy was quicker and smarter. She started to undo his bonds, starting with his legs. For a fleeting instant, Doug wondered if he was being shown mercy. Far from it. "Don't worry, baby," she teased. "Mommy will help." With one quick heave, she shoved his legs up towards the ceiling and back towards his chest. His butt was now pointed away from the mattress, and the final bit of pressure pushed him over the edge. The floodgates opened as Doug's body finished its ultimate betrayal, and helplessly messed himself, just like the infant he was dressed as. He felt the diaper expand beneath him, but not nearly enough as wet, mushy poop filled his seat and spread out, and his bowels kept on pushing, as if acting on some kind of muscle memory that had faded, but not disappeared, with potty training. His front side became equally warm and wet, with his bladder deciding to get in on the act. If the swelling and ballooning in the back of his diaper wasn't bad enough, the meteors on the front of the diaper started fading with the wetness, disappearing from the front and marking his shame. Mommy's kisses to his forehead helped, but not much. "That's right, baby. Be good and use your diaper." Never before had he been so degraded, so humiliated. He'd just filled his pants like a giant toddler. Not even a toddler. Toddlers could at least find a place to hide before they soiled themselves. He'd just done it all while lying down. And it was all on camera. He was ruined. Ruined. If he ever got out of line, she'd ruin him. He wasn't much to begin with, but now if he did see a rise in his station, he could be brought right back down into the playpen. No. Melissa stroked his forehead. Don't worry, Dougie, Mommy will change you. She's used to cleaning up your messes. The diaper just makes it easier. She walked back over to the dresser and laid her hand on the stack of diapers. All you have to do is ask. Please. Doug blurted out. Please what? Please change me. Please change my diaper. Please, who? Please, Mommy. Please. Please change my diaper, Mommy. His girlfriend, no, his mommy did seem pleased. But she didn't pick up a fresh diaper. Not right away. Instead, she opened the dresser drawer and took out an electric buzz cutter, a can of shaving cream, a towel and a straight razor. I will, she told him. But first I have to do something for you. You don't look like a big boy with your hair all messy like that, but you definitely don't look like Mommy's precious boy. She smiled. Let's fix that. Mommy. No, don't. I'll be good. I promise. I know you'll be good, baby Dougie, she said. Because you're not getting out of that messy diaper until I make you all nice and clean up top. Something appropriate for job interviews. And the longer it takes me to clean you up, the more likely it is you're gonna get a nasty rash. She stole a look at the camera. Or I could just send this video out, right now. Would you like that? Doug already knew the answer to that. So did Mommy. She wasn't Melissa right now, rather some horrific persona Melissa had concocted. He stayed as still as he could, trembling as she shorn his hair like a sheep down to a buzz cut, and shaved his face until it was, perhaps literally, baby smooth. All the while, Doug was in a special kind of agony, trying not to move or talk too much even as his diaper cooled and became itchy and smelly. No wonder babies cried when they needed changing. He would too if his ass started to itch and burn without him being able to scratch it even if his arms were free. Doug wasn't sure he could scratch his ass through all of the padding wrapped around it. He'd just end up smearing more of his own mess all over himself. When she was done and had collected all the hair in the towel, she popped the giant pacifier back into Doug's mouth and went and got the fresh diaper and wipes. This one had a blue T-Rex on it. Great. Different decorations for different diapers. Fuck. It was probably about as manly a diaper as he could expect. You were such a good boy, Mommy praised him. Doug's blush was full body, and infinitely more easy to see now that all the hair was out of and off of his face. Time to change your diaper. The tapes came off of the plastic with an audible rip. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each one a little rip to Dougie's pride, modesty, and psyche. Phew. Mommy waved her hand in front of her nose. You really did a number in this one, baby. She sighed. But I should be used to it, I guess. He'd never admit it, as awful as this was, but the cold wipes felt nice on his skin. It even made it a little easier to suck on the pacifier. He did his best to follow instructions and raise his legs as instructed. He didn't whine or fuss. He just let her do the work on him. After the muck and residue were wiped off of him, Mommy balled up the diaper and threw it away in a garbage can by the dresser. Except it wasn't a garbage can that Dougie could ever remember seeing. That was new. And the lids on those flip-top waste baskets weren't normally nearly as heavy. Still naked on the bed, Dougie used his freed feet to shuffle up to a sitting position and get a better view of the thing. The thing had letter stickers decorating it. If he hadn't figured out what it was before, he had it literally spelled out for him a second later. Dougie's diaper pail. How far was this going? Wordlessly, Mommy turned around and saw that he'd moved. Whack! The bare-handed slap on his naked thigh hurt even more after a little bit of time had been given to it. Dougie couldn't get flat on his back fast enough. Almost done. She threw a glance at the shaving equipment, but not quite. Somebody needs another lesson. Straight razor in hand, she zeroed in on his pubic area. Dougie dared not do anything other than lie still. Lie. Very. Still. Careful, baby, Mommy said, adding words to his dread. I don't wanna nick anything, then she said something worse. This will make you so much easier to keep you clean. Oh, how long was Mommy planning on staying Mommy? How long was she planning on keeping him like this? Once his public hair was removed, Mommy sprinkled on the baby powder and rubbed it in. That's about the time when Dougie realized the nice smell in the tiny apartment's living room. He slammed his eyes shut, refusing to look as Mommy drew up the fresh diaper between his legs and taped it on. He couldn't see it. But he could hear, feel, and smell everything. The crinkle, the tightening and press with each tape, the smell of the powder. All he could do was suck on the pacifier, praying for it to be over. Okay, Mommy said. She reached over and uncuffed him. Stand up. He did, easily. The hard part was not making a break for it. He wouldn't get far though, not in a big baby diaper and sucking on a soother. Yikes. Why was he envisioning himself keeping the parky? He shivered at the thought. Mommy clicked her tongue. Poor baby feels cold, she said. Good thing Mommy's prepared. The top drawer was also stocked with a t-shirt. A pastel blue t-shirt with pictures of safety pins and rattles on it. Nothing a self-respecting adult would ever wear. Arms up. Apparently, Dougie wasn't a self-respecting adult anymore. The shirt came over his head and his arms went through the sleep. Mommy kept tugging down past his waist and between his legs. The sound of snaps being fastened right by his crotch made him look down. The good news was, his diaper was no longer completely on display, the leg gathers just barely poked out of the onacy. The bad news was that Dougie was now wearing a onacy. Better, she asked. Obediently, Dougie nodded. Mommy took him by the hand, and let him out of their bedroom. For the second time that day, the pacifier dropped out of Dougie's mouth, this time clattering to the floor. Dougie didn't recognize the place. All of the garbage had been completely cleared out, and the floors swept and mopped. Completely spotless. But the furniture was gone too. No more TV. Or video game system. Gone was the couch. His favorite recliner had been pilfered. In their place was a blackboard, an adult-sized crib, and a stool placed in the corner. It looked like some kind of preschool classroom. Where did you get this stuff? Where'd all of my stuff G-dash? The pacifier was picked up and shoved back in his mouth before he could finish his second sentence. His mommy. Yikes, this was having an effect on him, booped the pacifier on his mouth. Keep this in your mouth. She smiled, but Dougie could hear the or else in her voice. She waited a moment. He sucked the pacifier. Finally, she said, it's time for your punishment. Time for his punishment. This wasn't his punishment. He was led to the blackboard. Up close he noticed a few extra details, like how the alphabet border around the rolled-in chalkboard only had the letters A, B, D, and L. His girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, his mommy picked up a piece of chalk and put it in his hand. You're going to write, babies don't have jobs 200 times on this blackboard. The diapered boy looked at the rolled-out blackboard. Okay, he mumbled around the binky. It wasn't the biggest blackboard in the world, but if he kept his writing small enough he should just be able to squeeze it in, no problem. With your right hand. Woo! No way could he use his non-dominant hand. No possible way. As a guy, his handwriting was sloppy enough, but in his right hand it'd be almost impossible. Just, like, Mommy wasn't hearing any of it. Get to work, baby boy. The swat to his padded backside didn't hurt, but it did make him jump to work. She stood back, watching him expectantly. Dougie slumped. He really was in the doghouse this time. His diaper crinkled a bit as he nervously shifted his weight. His gait was off too, wider than it normally would have been, with all the pulp and padding forcing his legs further apart. He really hoped he'd never have to get used to this. Slowly, with shaky and sloppy writing, Dougie wrote down, "Babies don't have jobs. Babies don't have jobs. Babies don't have jobs." He found that if he wrote in all caps it went faster. He just wanted this to be over. To stop being treated like a naughty little boy, and to get his big boy pants back on. Babies don't have jobs. And so on it went until his fingers hurt and his wrist ached. Please just let this be over. Much, 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 much too soon, he ran out of room. Even writing as fast and as small as he could, he just barely broke 100 before all the space was taken up. "Emmy," he mumbled. "I'm out of room." Mommy walked up and held her hand under her chin. She grabbed the eraser from the blackboard and sent every sentence to oblivion. "Too bad," she said. "None of that counts. Try it again. 200 times on one side or nothing." Dougie spit the binky out into his hand. "What?" he asked. He lowered his volume. "Honey. Mommy. Can't we have a compromise? Can't I write it 200 times altogether? I ran out of room. I didn't mean to do it on purpose." Dark embers burned in Mommy's eyes. "I told you not to spit your binky out." In a blink, Dougie's ear was on fire. First he was dragged over to the corner and pressed down onto a low stool. Time out. He was being sent to time out. Maybe the baby is too young for school. Maybe he's not ready to grow up and shouldn't be allowed to even write lines. Dougie looked up, his face sunken. "No. I'm not. I can grow up, Mommy. I promise." Mommy wasn't hearing any of it. Dougie sat there dumbfounded as she walked away, leaving him there and heading for the bathroom. She wasn't gone long. In her hand was a bar of soap. "Let's see if you can learn to keep this in your mouth." She pinched his nose and wedged it in his teeth. Reflexively, Dougie's tongue retreated as far back into his throat as it could, short of him swallowing it. Simultaneously, his saliva mixed with the foul-tasting stuff, making him start to foam at the mouth like a mad dog. 5 minutes. Mommy told him, holding out 5 fingers as if he was too little to understand the concept otherwise. "You keep it in for 5 minutes. I'm going to the bathroom to use the potty. If you take it out, I'll know." As she walked away, Dougie could only sit there on the naughty stool, breathing through his mouth, trying not to taste the soap, his uvula rattling with each exhale as a way to try and prevent him from gagging. Bubbling drool started to drip out of the corners of his lips. He refused to swallow. Blinking, he released a stream of pee into his diaper. Deep down, he knew it wouldn't be the last time he went in his pants today. Over his shoulder he glanced at the crib, knowing it'd be where he slept tonight. He'd been broken down to his base elements. Deep down, he knew, he was just a baby. Until Mommy said otherwise, he was just a baby who had been waiting for a strong mommy to teach him how to behave. This Life on a small island. I was mostly brought up in a small town a few miles outside of Bath. I lived with both parents and my big brother. He was 15 and I was 11 when my parents dropped the bombshell that we were moving to the Channel Islands. And when they showed us which one, we weren't impressed. My parents had bought a house on Alderney, one of the smallest islands in the archipelago, and thus begun the most tedious and boring years of my life. Our parents are very successful IT freelancers and mostly worked from home. This meant they can easily carry on their normal working lives, retain their earnings and live on a remote island away from the hustle and bustle. My brother and I hated the idea, but nothing we could say would deter them from their selfish dream. They wanted a big house, a sea view, tax breaks, and plenty of time relaxing. They hated having to socialize with friends and acquaintances every weekend, having to visit their respective relatives every month or so, and figured island life would stop all that. They could work and relax and do little else. My brother was much more vocal in his opposition to the move than I, but our parents made it perfectly clear that it was not our decision to make. So as soon as I finished junior school in July, we packed up and left. I was looking forward to going to high school in Bath with my friends from junior school. It was far more appealing than going to a high school in a small town on a tiny island where I'd have to make new friends from scratch. Unlike life back in Blighty, life on Alderney was confined and boring. The island is 3 miles long, 1.5 miles wide, and hosts a population of some 2,500 people. Everybody seemed to know each other and they were very cliquey towards newcomers. Alderney also had a few remnants of archaic law left which set it aside from the rest of the UK. For example, they still have the birch, and technically the stocks can also be used for corporal punishment. Children can leave school 2 years early with their parents' consent and providing that they would be in full-time employment. This was usually in the case of farming families where helping out and learning to run the farm took precedent over passing exams they'd never need. Employment was scarce and many school leavers would leave the island as soon as they could, in search of opportunities on the mainland. This led to an aging population which only added to the tedium of life on Alderney. It had been suggested that in 2 or 3 decades' time, there will be a massive labour shortage on the island as more and more of the island's youngsters leave as soon as they reach working age. The statistics are quite revealing. The numbers of islanders age under 30 have been in decline since the 1960s, and as a result, the over 65s now outnumber the under 30s by almost 2:1. In order to curb the aging population, there was talk of upping the age limit where a child could leave their parental home from 16 to 18 years, and possibly to 21 years by some hardliners on the island's council. This is one of many reasons my brother left the island sooner rather than later. And I swore to myself that I too would leave as soon as I turned 16. Unfortunately for me, the proposed legislation proved popular amongst the islanders and as such, it stood a good chance of being passed. My brother had no intention of sticking around, only to risk being lawfully obliged to stay longer. The teenagers of the island had nothing to do but loiter, get moved on by the local bobbies, loiter somewhere else, get moved on again and eventually go home. The nearest thing to a youth club on Alderney is a weekly church group, and a monthly disco run by the church group. I remains to this day the single most boring thing I've ever attended. Apart from that, there's very little for a teenager to do, so it's no wonder that they tend to head for the mainland as soon as they can. Didn't enjoy school either. Being an outsider meant I didn't make any friends, so I pestered my parents to allow me to leave at 14 instead of 16. They flat refused as we were not a farming family, and what would I do instead? I just shrugged. All I wanted was to leave school early, hide my head for 2 years and get the fuck off this rock. I could always go into further education on the mainland and take my exams in more favourable surroundings. My brother had been gone for 2 years. He'd write occasionally, saying he was getting by and loved living in London, although he never provided an address. By this time I was 13 years old. I'd given up on being allowed to leave school early and bided my time, looking forward to leaving to join my big brother as soon as I turned 16. Then the bombshell dropped. The law was passed and the minimum age one could leave their parental home was up to 21. They can't do that. I protested as the news was aired. I begged my folks to move us back to the mainland, but they had no intention of leaving their idyllic island life. So that was it, I'd be stuck on this rock for another 7 or 8 years, and not the 3 I'd anticipated. I hatched a plan to leave as soon as possible. Fuck school, fuck my parents and fuck this island. I decided to stow away on the ferry to Portsmouth, then make my way to London and find my brother. This wasn't going to be easy, especially the stowing away bit, so my plan had to be flawless. I spent a lot of time hanging around by the ferry port. I always hung out alone, so this didn't seem unusual to my folks. I decided that the best way aboard the ferry would be to hide in the back of a lorry, so I staked out the few hauliers on the island and worked out their patterns. I figured getting in would be easy, and the Coast Guard didn't appear to check the backs of most lorries, so in theory, it'd be a cinch. Obviously I'd have to get off the boat or the truck at the other end without being caught, and that was something I'd have to take my chances on. I'd need money too, so I stopped spending my pocket money on sweets, pop and comics and saved it up for a few months. I had a rucksack packed with clothes and a sleeping bag under my bed. I had about £30 cash and I could go when the opportunity arrived. I sneaked out in the dead of night on numerous occasions. Firstly, to make sure I could make an exit without disturbing my parents, and secondly, to stake out the haulage depots between dusk and dawn. Before long I knew the movements on the island better than most, and I'd worked out exactly which lorry I'd stow myself in. The depot opened at 5 a.m, drivers arrived between 5:30 and 6 a.m, and that particular truck left the island daily on the 7 a.m. ferry. I knew how to get into the yard unseen and where to hide inside the lorry. All I needed was to leave home at around 4 a.m. without my folks knowing. His golden opportunity comes when he notices a bundle of notes hanging out of his dad's wallet. £250. He takes the opportunity and makes sure he's off the island before his dad noticed the missing cash. He stows away, gets to London, doesn't find his brother, ends up on the streets for 10 months. Life is rough, and having to beg or steal and sleep in a variety of squats or homeless hangouts put him in the company of some very unsavory characters. He did meet a few people he could call friends, as he was far from the only young runaway living in London's less desirable areas. Two of these friends were a young couple called Patrick and Lisa, aged 17 and 15 respectively. Patrick had an obvious drug problem, and Lisa was obviously besotted with him despite his obvious flaws. She'd beg every day in order to buy their food and support his habit. I met them on the street and Lisa invited me back to their squat. After 3 months with no roof and no friends, I felt like I'd really landed on my feet. In reality, I was staying in a derelict boarded-up house with a caring funny girl and her abusive and needy boyfriend. I spent most of my days out begging alone, spending what I got on food and, presumably, having Patrick steal the change whilst I slept. One day Lisa took me begging with her because she said it was better begging in pairs. "Why don't you take Pat?" I quizzed, him being her boyfriend and the benefactor of most of her earnings. She said he owed a few dealers, so couldn't risk being seen on the streets. She also added that people tend to take more pity on girls. I pointed out that, like her boyfriend, I wasn't a girl either, but she told me that unlike her boyfriend, I was short, skinny, and with my overgrown head of hair, would pass. Obviously this made me get a bit shirty, as no boy likes being told he looks girly. However, her plan for relieving the great British public from their hard-earned cash involved 2 young girls who needed to borrow their train fare home. I said it would work just as well if we were brother and sister, but she pulled rank as a more seasoned beggar and insisted it needed 2 sisters. "We'll make far more than simply begging, and it's not like I'm asking you to wear a dress or anything, but if you don't like it, you can always go off on your own," she suggested. "How much do you normally make a day anyway?" she asked. "About a £5. I replied, and Lisa said if I stuck with her we'd make 10 times that. We hung out at Euston Station day after day. I didn't really have to do anything, just sit and look miserable whilst Lisa approached people, telling them that she and her sister, me, came on a coach trip, missed the coach back and needed to get home to Bristol. Most people didn't fall for it, but those who did gave her anything between £10 and £60 to put towards 2 single train tickets. We kept this up for a few days before being moved on by security. I thought the game was up as we shuffled away, but Lisa said we'd just do the same thing at Paddington. She also said that a few people that morning saw through the scam because they realized I wasn't a girl and therefore not her sister. Well, just tell them I'm your brother instead, I suggested. Again, Lisa said it wouldn't work as well because people take much more pity on girls in distress, before suggesting that if I wore a little eye makeup and put something in my hair, I'd be much more passable. I wasn't keen on the idea, but Lisa insisted, reminding me that if it wasn't for her I'd be on my ass. She was right. Since we started begging together, I've not gone hungry in spite of the fact that most or our earnings fed her boyfriend's drug habit. So reluctantly I let her apply a little eyeliner and mascara, and wore a pair of daisy clips in my hair. According to Lisa, it worked a treat. We pulled the same scam at Piccadilly Station for over a week before security got wind of it and moved us on. We tried other stations, but word had got around, so we had to resort to asking strangers if they had any spare change. Each day Lisa and I went out together. She'd apply a little eyeliner for me and put a couple of clips in my hair before we loitered by our individual cash machines. This was far less fruitful than the train fare scam, as coins were given instead of notes, but by begging as a girl, it was significantly more profitable than when I begged as a boy. I could get well over a tenner a day with my girly voice and hair clips, but nothing near what we earned as a sisters in need of a ticket home. Things got much worse for Lisa. Her boyfriend was beaten up by some people he owed money to, and he blamed her for not begging enough. I was used to him stealing the spare change out of my pockets as I slept, but he decided that beating it out of me was less of a hassle. But that's nothing compared to what Lisa went through. When the heavies came to the squat to get money off Pat, they decided that since he couldn't pay, then his girlfriend should. Lisa became quieter and more insular after that. Within a few months she rarely came begging with me. Instead, she stayed at the squat wearing full makeup and minimal clothing, taking a variety of men to her room. From the noises it was clear what was going on, and from her general mindset, she clearly wasn't happy. I reverted to begging as a boy, as Lisa was no longer there to do my eyes or put my ears on, my ears being the 2 plastic daisy hair clips she used to lend me. My takings were beyond meager, and 2 meals a day were a thing of the past. One evening Lisa came into my room. She was clearly upset and told me that it would be best if I left. She tearfully told me that I would soon be at risk from the dealers if I stuck around. I suggested that she get out too, but she said she couldn't. I questioned why she's so willingly giving her body away to support Patrick's heroin addiction when she'd be so much better off on her own. She hung her head and told me that she too was addicted. At first I didn't believe her, as she wanted nothing more than Patrick to kick his habit and hated heroin with a passion. She told me that they had forced the addiction on her and showed me the needle marks. Why would they do that? I ignorantly asked. Because if I don't do what they want, I don't get my fix, and believe me, Marty, that is far worse than giving some filthy old bloke a blowjob, she replied. I almost wanted to puke at the thought of it, but having witnessed Patrick at his worst, I had half an idea what going without a fix was like. They've already used you to threaten me, she admitted, so you need to go. What do you mean used me? I asked. I won't go into details, but, she paused. They said if I didn't do a certain thing, they'd get my little girlfriend to do it. She looked at me, making it clear that I was the little girlfriend. I told them you were a boy hoping. She paused and sighed a guilty sigh. But they said that makes it even better. I left that very night and headed to the Arches, a well-known homeless hangout, and never saw or heard of Lisa or her boyfriend again. I met another friend. A boy called Justin who had run away from his abusive father in Harrogate. We hung out for a couple of weeks as we begged in similar areas. I was proudly telling him about the scam Lisa and I used to run at the train stations, although I left out the fact that I was posing as Lisa's little sister, but made a big deal of the times we'd make £50 or £60 within an hour. He said he could earn that in 5 minutes. I asked him how and wished I hadn't. I distanced myself from Justin after this revelation and kept myself to myself, getting by with begging and occasionally shoplifting. The first time is always the scariest. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought the staff would hear it as I left the shop with my jacket stuffed with sausage rolls, a pasty, and a carton of milk. After that it just got easier and easier. On a few occasions I'd be clocked and had to drop the stock and make a run for it, and half the time they'd shout, "Stop that girl," instead of "boy." When begging I tried to ask for spare change in a softer, more feminine voice which Lisa encouraged me to use, hoping I'd get more pity should the odd kindly soul mistake me for a girl. But without Lisa to apply a little eye makeup and put her clips in my hair, my ploy wasn't that successful. I did consider either buying or stealing some mascara and eyeliner, but could never pluck up the courage to do either. I'd probably make a mess putting it on anyway. I managed a few more weeks before getting collared by a security guard. I rolled my eyes when he radioed through saying, "I've got her." I said nothing as he led me to a holding room where I waited in solitude for the police to arrive. A stern-looking WPC came to take me to the station. She asked me my name and address. The former I gave her, the latter I didn't have. I figured the less I told them the better the chance of me getting out. Why, I thought that I have no idea. And from my name alone they managed to find my address and contact my parents. My heart sank as the WPC returned to my cell and told me exactly who I was and exactly where I came from. "You'll remain here until your parents arrive to take you back to Alderney," the WPC told me, before assuming how nice it must be to live on one of the Channel Islands. I told her how much I hated it and exactly why I left. "You know, we're not even allowed to leave home until 21. I added. She told me it's the law and I should have abided by it. "You can't possibly tell me that you're better off begging and stealing a living on the streets than being a bit bored at home?" she asked patronizingly. I spent the night in a cell and the following day my parents arrived. Dad berated me whilst Mum signed the release forms. 10 minutes later my mother joined in the berating before telling my father we could go back to Alderney. "That was quick," Dad replied. "I thought he'd at least have to see a magistrate first," he added. "It's all going to be dealt with on Alderney," Mum replied. "There'll be a court hearing as soon as we return," she said. "Maybe the birch will knock some sense into you." I'd been caned at school and from all reports, the birch is far more painful. However, from all reports its use was also very rare, especially since the Alderney courts generally deal with nothing more serious than vandalism, littering, drunk and disorderly and the odd parking ticket. We took a train from London to Portsmouth and from there we'd take the overnight ferry to Alderney. My mother asked me why I'd left. I shrugged, said I hated the island, said I hated school, said I missed my brother and went to find him. "I couldn't bear being stuck there till I'm 21. I added. "Well, there's nothing we can do about that," my dad interjected. "It's the law of the island and we simply have to abide by it." But you're a minor and you don't have a choice," Dad interrupted. "You're 14 for God's sake. And look at you," he spat. Mum looked at me disparagingly. Having spent the last 10 months as runaway, living in squats and shop doorways, I was smelly and scruffy. My hair hadn't been cut in all that time and it wasn't that short when I left. "What happened to my son?" she asked. "Your clothes are in tatters, you're filthy and you desperately need a haircut," she ranted, picking up a strand of my long hair and dropping it as if contaminated. "I'd think you were a girl if you weren't so scruffy." The security guard thought he was a girl. Dad chirped up. "What security guard?" Mum asked. "The one who caught him shoplifting," Dad replied. "The desk officer was telling me when you went to his cell," he said. The security guard rang in saying he'd caught a young girl shoplifting. Dad chuckled. "So they sent a WPC instead of a bloke to arrest her." "Well, if he was a girl we'd probably not be here now," Mum retorted before tuning her attention back to me and screwing up her nose as she did so. "And what we're going to do about your clothes I've no idea." I looked at my hands, thumbing each other nervously through the curtains of my long fringe. My blackened knees were fully visible through the holes in my jeans, a sight I was long used to. When I left, I took almost all of my clothes with me, as I knew I'd not have chance to launder them until I traced my brother, so having as many changes as possible was necessary. As the days, weeks, and months passed, and having no money except for what I could beg meant my clothes wore out quick, and before long I had only one pair of jeans, one jumper, and my jacket. I wasn't looking forward to going back to the island, but was relieved that my homeless experience was finally over. "I'll just have to get some new ones," I said as I played with the frayed edge of one of my knee holes. "And have you got any money?" Mum asked. I shook my head. "So you think you can steal your father's money, disappear for almost a year, then have us trail all the way to London just to bring you home, at considerable expense, and you expect us to buy new clothes for you?" she barked. I gulped and shook my head. "Your mother has a point, young man," Dad added. "You chose to turn your back on us and now you're expecting us to put everything right again. You're as bad as your bloody brother," he spat. Some son he turned out to be. He turned in his seat and looked me straight in the eye. "And some son you're turning out to be. I'm not surprised your mother cleared your room once we realized you probably weren't coming home." Just like he did. My mind raced to my bedroom, or my bedroom as I remember it. All my old things, my posters and model aeroplanes hanging from the ceiling. "You threw it all out?" There was pause before Mum replied. "Well, what did you expect?" she asked. "You'd been gone 6 months and we knew you had no intention of coming back." She paused for my non-existent reaction. "Did you think we'd keep it exactly as it was? Like a bloody shrine," she spat. Hearing this launched me into a tirade of how selfish they were, how it's always been about them, how they shipped us off to Alderney, and I don't blame Brian for leaving as soon as he could. Both my parents stood by each other, hitting back at my every complaint. They bring in the money, they pay the mortgage, they put food on the table, clothes on my back, shoes on my feet, and how do I repay them? Our argument faded and eventually we fell into a long uncomfortable silence. I gave my attention once again the rolling countryside, and within a couple of hours we were boarding the ferry. I say ferry, it's more like a big fishing boat. The crossing took us through the night, and with the constant engine noise, the rocking back and forth, it was difficult to sleep. As dawn broke, I saw the island of Alderney for the first time since I'd escaped almost a year earlier. As we walked from the harbour into the island's only town, St. Anne's, people stopped and stared at me. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody else, and each and every shameful stare I received made me want to leave more than ever. I was marched directly to the courthouse where a judge and 3 jurors were waiting for me. The chief of police was also present, as was the headmistress from the only high school on the island, the school I hated more than the island itself. My mother volunteered to defend me rather than pay for a lawyer. I hung my head as the charges were read out: unauthorized absconding, breaking and entering, unauthorized passage, the shoplifting charge in London, and the theft of £250 cash from my father. I knew it would be futile pleading anything other than guilty, so that is what I did. After the 30-minute hearing, I was fined £200 for breaking and entering the small haulage firm, £150 for unauthorized passage, £80 for shoplifting, plus £120 court costs. I was also ordered to repay my father the £250 and given 300 hours of unpaid work community service for absconding. My head was spinning as I tried and failed to add it all up. How long is 300 hours? I wondered as the headmistress from the high school began talking down to me. Being told that due to my new criminal record, I would not be permitted to return to school. This was the best thing I'd heard that day. Now all I have to do is get off this fecking island. I pondered. Hardly anybody drove on the island. The only vehicles were a few delivery lorries and tractors, the odd quad bike and a handful of motorbikes. Many people cycled but most walked. My parents gave me the 3rd degree throughout the 20-minute walk to their house. I'd brought shame on them, and now I've been thrown out of school. I'd need to find a job. Don't think for 1 minute we're going to pay your way, my dad spat. You will pay rent and board, and any money we spend you will repay. And who's going to employ you with your record? I have no idea, Mum added. They were both right. I was well and truly fucked. When we arrived home, I went straight to my old bedroom. With all the drama of the day, I'd almost forgotten that Mum said she'd thrown everything out. And she meant everything. What are you looking for? Mum spat as I opened the fourth empty drawer in a row. I turned to her, stood sternly in the doorway. I was going to have a shower and change out of these, I replied, looking down at my tattered jeans and filthy jumper. But you've thrown everything out. Well, I wasn't planning on you coming back, she replied as she pushed past me and slammed the open drawer shut. She leant back on the chest of drawers, folded her arms, exhaled slowly through her nostrils, and she looked me up and down. I suppose we could find you something cheap from the charity shop to tide you over, she said in the most relaxed voice I'd heard since I returned. But you will repay me from your wages, when you find a job, that is. I timidly looked up at her and forced a pursed smile. Thanks, Mum. I gulped. And in the meantime you'll just have to borrow something of mine. This may sound odd, but my mother is rather slim and petite and my father is tall and rotund. Even one of Dad's t-shirts would reach the floor on me. Having a hot shower was heaven. I'd not been clean for weeks, months probably. Grey water ran from the ends of my hair, which looked longer than ever being wet, hanging several inches over my shoulders. I was enjoying the warm torrent of clean water a bit too much. My mother opened the bathroom door and hollered at me. "Are going to spend all day in there," she said as she pulled the power cord, making the flow of water turn instantly cold. I jumped out of the stream before turning off the flow. I apologized to my mum as she tossed a bathrobe on the chair. After drying myself, I pulled on the robe and went to my bedroom. I grabbed and squeezed the collar of my robe as I looked around the empty room. Even the bed was bare. Mum appeared behind me with a garment on a clothes hanger. "This will do for now," she said. "What's that?" I asked knowingly. "Clothing," she replied dryly. The garment was, on the bottom a pair of short navy blue shorts and on the top a white shirt, both stitched together. I was hoping for a pair of joggers and a t-shirt, I said. My disappointment was obvious. "Well, I don't have any joggers," she replied as she turned the garment around and began to unfasten the zip which ran down the back. "But," I retorted, "I can't wear that." "Well, you don't have much choice," she replied, "and you'll have to wear these too," she added, passing me a pair of white cotton knickers. I felt my face physically drop. "Are you sure you haven't got anything else?" I asked as I perched on the edge of the bed to pull on the knickers. "There's plenty of skirts and dresses which would fit you," Mum replied. "Would you like me to get you one instead of this?" she asked, holding the ghastly yet vaguely boyish outfit squarely in front of me. I recoiled, looking more closely at it. 6 brass buttons were stitched in 2 vertical rows on the shorts, and the top shirt section had short puffed sleeves and a Peter Pan collar, both with blue piping. Reluctantly, I stepped into the garment before pulling it up to my waist. For a boy, getting into a garment from behind is very strange. I pushed my hands and arms through the sleeves and shuffled the shirt onto my shoulders. Mum helped me with the zip and I quizzed her on how women or girls get into things like this on their own. "With great difficulty," Mum replied. "Which is why I never wear it," she added as she turned me around, straightened the collar and looked me up and down. "It'll do for you though," she half smiled. "For now, I guess," I replied, before looking down at myself. I knew the bottom half was in fact a pair of shorts, with 2 legs and everything, but they hung in a kind of A-line, not a stone's throw away from a skirt. The top half wasn't much better, with short gathered sleeves and the round collar. A row of faux buttons ran down the front. I didn't realize just how ridiculous I looked until my mother showed me my reflection in the large mirrors in her and Dad's bedroom. It may as well be a dress, looking at the way the shorts hung from the high waistline. Mum then slid the large mirrored door to the left, revealing a rack full of her skirts, dresses and other outfits. She dropped to her knees and began pulling out a variety of footwear. "Mum, I can't wear any of those," I said in a squeaky pleading voice. "I'll look alright." I stopped myself from saying "girl" as my mother cast me a look of disdain. "If looks could kill and all that." "Well, your fathers won't fit you, will they?" she said impatiently before grabbing 3 or 4 pairs of flat summer shoes and telling me to try them for size. None would quite fit and she was adamant that I wasn't going to stretch any. Mum routed deeper in her wardrobe. "These have always been too big for me," she said, revealing a pair of black-heeled shoes with a round toe and a single strap. I questioned why I need shoes at all. "Because you can hardly walk around barefoot, can you?" Knowing my own tattered plimsolls were already in the bin left me no other option. "But surely you've got a pair of trainers?" I asked pleadingly. "They'll be too small, and I'm not going to let you stretch them," Mum replied. "These'll do you for now," she said, plonking the shoes unceremoniously at my feet. Wearing girls' shoes with a clumpy heel and no socks was beyond weird. When Mum closed her wardrobe door, I got a full view of myself in the large mirror. I pleaded with my mother not to make me wear these clothes, but she insisted it's all she has to offer me at the moment, adding that the shame would do me good. My dad looked me up and down disdainfully when I entered the sitting room. Then he burst out laughing. "What do you look like?" he scoffed. "It'll do him for the time being," my mother replied on my behalf. "I'll take him to the charity shop later to get him something more appropriate," she added, glancing at me. I frowned at the prospect of going outdoors wearing a woman's sailor-style playsuit. "Oh, I think that's entirely appropriate," Dad bellowed as Mum went upstairs. He turned back to me. "No doubt you're thinking of stowing away again, but I doubt you'll try it dressed like that." I hung my head. Dad was right, there's no way I want to be seen by anybody in this. The sooner I get my own clothes the better, and until then, I'll have to play my cards right. Mum passed through with a basket full of laundry and went into the utility room. After few seconds banging and clattering, she returned empty-handed. "Right, you can start earning your keep," she said sternly before telling that I'd be doing all the chores from now on. My high heels clacked noisily on the terracotta floor tiles as I followed her to the utility room. No sooner had I taken a big handful of laundry from the basket and began forcing it into the washing machine, she stopped me. "Separate the whites from the colors, the lights from the darks, and put the delicates in a laundry bag," she instructed impatiently. I apologized and began doing as told. "Why are you putting those there?" she yelled as I put a pair of her bright green knickers in the colored pile. "Because they are colored," I muttered, knowing it was the wrong answer. "They're delicates, obviously," she replied as she removed them and held the lacy satin garment in front of me. I recoiled slightly before she placed them in a separate pile. She told me that her underwear is delicates and Dad's isn't. She said her slips, nighties and tights go in the delicates too, and all need to be washed in a laundry bag. I didn't feel comfortable handling her smalls and Mum knew it. "They won't bite you," she snapped as I separated a pale pink pair of knickers from a pair of black tights. "You are wearing some too, in case you'd forgotten." I felt myself blush as I continued sorting the washing under my mother's watchful eye. Once it had all been separated, Mum showed me how to set the washing machine. She then drew my attention to a pile of bedding and said it all needed ironing. "You don't iron bedsheets, do you?" I asked, knowing the bedding never used to be ironed. A wry smile swept her face. "I don't, but you do," she replied before giving me brief instructions on the use of an iron. "And if you burn them, you pay for them," she sternly informed me. Ironing the bedding took me well over an hour, and by the time that had finished, so had the first load of laundry. Mum stood over me as I removed one load and put the second on. She told me which setting was needed before telling me to hang out the laundry on the washing line. I was thankful we had no neighbors overlooking our garden as I hung out the laundry wearing heeled shoes in this. I glanced down at my clothing, having my pale thin legs almost fully exposed felt more humbling than the place suit itself. I never liked wearing shorts for PE and these are far too short for me. Mum made a round of sandwiches for dinner. She watched her son as he hung out the washing and after a few minutes called her husband over. He's actually quite handy all of a sudden, she said as they both looked out the window. He looks like a girl, her husband said disdainfully. And he's going to have to get that haircut if he's going to find a job. He's going to need some proper clothes too, she added. Much as I like your idea. Which idea? Keeping him dressed like that to keep him from running off again. Well, to be honest, it was more an observation, he replied, gazing out of the window towards their troublesome son. Either way, a dose of petticoating might be just what the doctor ordered. Petticoating. Google it, she advised him. But avoid the image search, that's just full of weirdos who like it, she added as she turned to watch her son trotting down the garden path with the empty basket. From this short distance his shorts look more like a very short skirt. There's a sandwich here, she bellowed through to the utility room as soon as she heard the door open. Excellent. I thought as I put the empty basket on top of the washer and entered the kitchen. Thanks, Mum. I said as I tucked into the meager meal before me. I was starving and knew this would not touch the sides. I would have asked for more, but the best thing I can do is put up and shut up. I also made sure I said thank you once I'd finished, hoping she asked if I'd had enough, but no such offer came. Instead, she had me ironing more things I knew she never ironed until the next load of washing was done. Most of this went in the tumble dryer as the washing line was full. Having nothing to do for a while, I sauntered back into the open plan lounge. Mum looked me up and down several times before asking if I'd finished the laundry or not. I told her the last load was in and she told me I'd need to empty the dryer and bring the washing in before long. I asked her when she was going to the charity shop. I'm not sure. I've got work to do and so have you, she replied. These tiles need a good scrub for a start, she said, looking at the floor tiles around her feet. I glanced at the clock. It was nearing 3:30. I suggested it would only take half an hour, and I'd have half the floor done by the time she gets back. I've made it perfectly clear that I am not going for you, I'm going with you, she spat. Now the sooner you realize you don't have any options and just do as you're told, the better. But I'm going to need my own clothes at some point, Mum, and I can't possibly go out like this. I replied, hoping she'd see reason in my plea. Well, they fit, don't they? She dryly replied. What more do you want? Not wanting to push her back into the realms of anger, I chose my words very carefully. Boys' clothes. I suggested timidly. Mum went into a brick wall mode and refused to discuss the matter any further. I spent the next hour or so on my hands and knees scrubbing the tiled floor which stretched from the front door, through the hallway and kitchen and into the utility room. I thought I'd finished, but Mum made me go over a few areas again which she felt I'd not done properly. I wouldn't mind if I'd seen her on her hands and knees with a scrubbing brush. She always mopped. Once she declared the tiles clean, I could finally arise from my knees. Mum told me the washing needed bringing in from the line. Scrubbing the floor was hard work and I'd worked up a bit of a sweat. The sea breeze whipping around my legs, arms and neck was most welcome as I walked up the garden path with the empty laundry basket. As he unpegged the washing, his mother couldn't help but frequently glance outside to check on him. His hair was blowing all over as the breeze had picked up considerably. She visualized him in bunches and smiled to herself. A thought she justified with the blustery wind. When he returned, she suggested a bobble, to stop your hair blowing all over your face. Why can't I just have it tied back? I moaned as my mother tied my hair into 2 low pigtails. Because it looks better like this. Mum replied as I thought about Lisa, the other woman who feminized me. Think yourself lucky I didn't give you proper bunches with pink ribbons, she threatened. But Mum, I look alright, I paused, or more, stopped myself. Girl. Mum said on my behalf. Yes, you do a bit, she admitted, before informing me that the 3rd load of washing needed hanging out, and once that was done, I could help her with supper. I thought about all the times people had mistaken me for a girl and using that to my advantage with a little help from Lisa. I began pulling the damp laundry from the machine into a basket. I hoped things had got better for Lisa as I hung out the washing, and reminisced about the good times we had scamming people at the train stations with our sister act. If only she could see me now. I smiled to myself. This was instantly followed by an uneasy feeling as I wondered how she was getting on, forced into prostitution with a drug habit to ensure her compliance. I counted the few blessings I had. Once the washing was hung, I returned and Mum told me to peel the potatoes and carrots and chop an onion. Whatever I chopped she dropped into a large pan of water. By rights you should really be wearing an apron, my mother said as she looked at my outfit. Why? I moaned. To stop your outfit from getting dirty, she replied, and as I understand it, a nice frilly apron is an essential aspect of petticoating. What's petticoating? I quizzed, not really wanting to know the answer. Putting boys in girls' clothes to make them behave themselves, she replied. Or to stop them running away, she added. I gulped and looked down at myself. So you're deliberately dressing me like this? Well, it's more a case of necessity for the time being. You don't exactly have any of your own clothes, do you? Mum did have a point. Not until you go to the charity shop and get me some. I replied. Well, you're going to have to earn them first, young man, she replied sharply. And in the meantime you will wear what you're given, do you understand? But, I looked down at myself. But what? My mother spat. I snarled and she squared up to me. Think yourself lucky you're not in the young offenders prison on Guernsey, she said. I think I'd rather be there than here if you're going to make me wear stuff like this all the time. I moaned. Oh, you think so, do you? Mum said before explaining a few facts about prison. Now if you still think you'd be better off inside, I can easily arrange it for you, she finished. You are on very thin ice, remember. I inhaled deeply. Given a choice of being forced to wear my mother's cast-offs or being bullied, beaten, and possibly raped on a daily basis, well, it's a no-brainer. I decided to put up and shut up, for the time being anyway. Mum made me loiter by the cooker whilst she sat watching TV. Apparently I had to keep an eye on the potatoes and carrots as they boiled. I'd much rather take the weight off my feet as these shoes don't have any of the cushioning my own footwear has had. Eventually Mum chopped a full tin of corned beef into the potato, carrot and onion stew and served supper. Disappointingly she gave me a small portion on a side plate whilst her and Dad ate from dinner plates. I reluctantly said I'd need more, seeing as I haven't had a proper meal for weeks, months even. Well, you've only got yourself to blame for that. And what did you expect, a fanfare welcome home, my dad replied. You should think yourself lucky your mother is putting clothes on your back and food in your stomach instead of complaining all the time, he said before stuffing a fork full of food into his fat face. Yeah, her clothes and barely enough food for a hamster. I thought as I tried to make my meager portion last as long as possible. His mother glanced at him intermittently as he sat at the breakfast bar eating his supper. Part of her did feel a little guilt for giving him a small portion, but the last thing she wants is him to think that now he's back, everything will go on as normal. She looked at the play suit she bought on a whim years ago. It never suited her, but it seemed perfect for him. She looked down at his feet. The heels of his shoes hooked over the stretcher of the stool, and all he was lacking was a pair of white knee or ankle socks. His short pigtails hung down his back. She smiled inwardly at his appearance as he placed a small portion of food in his mouth and chewed it slowly. It's a good job he's a runt, she thought, knowing how ridiculous any other boy his age would look dressed so effeminately. After supper I washed, dried and put away all the dishes before bringing in the final load of washing in from the line. This meant yet more ironing, which meant yet more time on my feet. I'm almost missing scrubbing the floor. Almost. Finally everything appeared to be done, at least for today. It was almost 8:30 and I asked my mother if I could watch TV. She said I could go to my room instead. It was not an ideal alternative seeing as my room consisted of a bare bed, empty shelves, empty wardrobe and empty drawers. I didn't even have a book to read or a radio to listen to, but at least I could take the weight off my feet. I sat on my bed and began to unfasten my shoes. They look far worse off than on, I thought as I placed them side by side before arching my feet and wiggling my toes. I rolled onto my side and supported my head on my fist just as my mother walked in. Once upon a time she'd knock first, but not now. She placed a folded duvet on the end of my bed and tossed a long white nightie over it. She told me that my new curfew is 8 o'clock, that my father had chocked the sash window so I wouldn't be able to climb out and that I'd be locked in my room until morning. But what if I need the toilet? I asked. Mum told me there was a chamber pot beneath the bed. But what if there's a fire? I asked. Mum glanced around the empty room and said, well, unless you have a box of matches stashed, there's little chance of that. She was right, I guess. There's not even a table lamp. She unfastened the zip on the back on my sailor suit and had me hang it in my wardrobe. Like the shoes, it looked far worse off than on. Asking my mother if I had to wear the nightie was futile. Of course I did, and she stressed that I was to wear my knickers beneath it, adding that she'd give me a clean pair in the morning. With that she closed the door and I heard the key turn and Mortai's lock a second later. I checked the window and Dad had in fact stopped it opening more than a couple of inches. I slumped myself on my bed, cursing myself. I recalled Lisa's words all those months ago when she first suggested the sisters scam, you don't have to wear a dress or anything. I wondered what would have happened. The next morning I woke early. What the time was I have no idea. 5 maybe 6 am. My mother unlocked my door at about 7, asked me if I'd used the chamber pot, before telling that it needed cleaning out first and foremost. I then sat and ate a small bowl of porridge which Mum had microwaved for me. I was never keen on porridge, but it's better than nothing. I asked my mother if we'd be going to the charity shop today, as she had promised. I reminded her of this promise when she said no. She reminded me that I'd brought everything on myself. And stewing in my cast-offs for a few days won't do you any harm, she added before telling me to go and shower whilst she found me something to wear. Mum was in my room when I exited the bathroom. On my bed lay my biggest fear, a dress. Mum, please don't make me wear that. I begged. I imagined wearing the black and white plaid pinafore dress as I stared at it and felt increasingly uncomfortable. Well, I can find you something much prettier if you'd like. But I figured you'd prefer something like this instead, she replied threateningly. I also found these which I've never worn, she added, passing me a plastic package, a brand new multi-pack of white knickers. The photo on the front showed the style. The front of the high-waist panties was all lace. I gulped and mumbled a thanks, before looking back at my bed. Alongside the pinafore dress lay a white blouse with a small round collar. It's trimmed with lace, as is the cuffs of its long sleeves. With my mother staring directly at me and smiling smugly, I pulled on a pair of knickers. The lace panel left my bits almost fully exposed as I buttoned myself into the feminine blouse. Having the pinafore drop over my shoulders came as a relief since my panties and bits are now out of sight. The dress, however, was pretty horrendous itself. It hung drably from my shoulders like a sack. Its short skirt section was pleated all the way around and connected to the pinafore at a low-hung dropped waist. I wore the same shoes as the previous day, and as if doing me a favor, Mum taught me how to put my own hair in pigtails. Why can't I just have it tied back? I moaned as I sat trying to separate my hair into 2 equal halves with a perfectly straight parting in the center. Because I want you to squirm for a while, she said as she took over and did my hair for me. You're going to have to learn how to do this before long though. I can't be expected to do it every day, she said as she tied it into 2 low pigtails again. Well, if you'd let me just tie it back you wouldn't have to. I growled. Or just get it cut short. Mum let out a long slow sigh. One day you might realize that speaking to me like that won't do you any favors. She said. And for that you can have ribbons in too, she said. She left me alone and returned a minute later. A handful of different colored strips of ribbon dangled from her fingers. I looked in horror at the selection: white, pale blue, pink, lilac, red. Please, Mum. I'm sorry, I said. I'm sure you are, she replied as she laid out the different colors in front of me. Please don't make me wear those, I pleaded as I felt my lip begin to quiver. You'll wear exactly what I tell you to wear, young man, my mother snapped. You're already wearing a dress, so a couple of ribbons won't make much difference, she added, before letting me choose the color as if it was a huge consolation. Needless to say, I chose the white ones. Now I don't want you taking these out as soon as my back's turned, Mum said as she tied the ribbons around my bobbles, and before you even think of complaining, don't bother or I'll put the pink ones in instead, right before they take you to Guernsey. My jaw dropped with this threat. I looked at my reflection. My pigtails tied with 2 white ribbons. The lace-trimmed round collar of my blouse over the round neck of my plaid pinafore. I looked down at the pleated skirt, my pale bare legs and my heeled black leather shoes. The thought of walking into a youth detention center dressed like this sent shivers down my spine. Mum told me to polish and dust the entire house from top to bottom, so armed with a small step stool, a duster, and can of pledge, I reluctantly, yet willingly did exactly as asked. It took me all morning to dust and polish the upstairs of the house. Dad emerged from his study at lunchtime. He took one look at me, sniggered and said, "You look like a prep school girl in that," before disappearing again with his lunch. I had no idea what a prep school was, but I doubt he was wrong. Mum called my name and told me there was some lunch for me, so I put down the duster and polish and trotted down the stairs. The single sandwich was barely adequate but greatly received. The advice that I should always smooth my skirt beneath me when I sit wasn't. An hour or so later I was polishing the banister when I heard the doorbell ring. "Will you answer that?" Mum shouted from her study. I looked down at my dress and shoes before gulping and looking towards the door. The bell rang again. "Do I have to do everything?" Mum hollered as she stormed through the hallway. I just stood frozen in horror halfway up the stairs as Mum answered the door. "Martin, can you come into the sitting room? Your probation officer is here," she shouted in my direction. Shit, I thought, wondering how quickly I could change. "Well, come on. I'm sure he hasn't got all day," said my mother as she appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Slowly, shyly and surely I made my way down the steps. One at a time. "I must apologize for his clothes," my mother said, putting on her posh tone of voice as I revealed myself. "Oh, said the stern-looking man as he looked me up and down. The ones he came home in were literally dropping of his back and he had nothing else, so he's making do with a few of my cast-offs," she explained. "But I've read that petticoating can be very effective," she added. The probation officer grumbled before introducing himself as Mr. Helsall. Mum offered him a cup of tea as she seated us both in the lounge. My dress felt very short as I sat on the low-slung sofa, and wearing heeled shoes didn't help either. I concentrated on keeping my knees together and my skirt covering as much of my lap as possible as he confirmed my name, age and, humiliatingly, my gender. He then confirmed my charges and subsequent punishments, which were explained to me at the courthouse the day I returned. He explained that I was on a 12-month suspended sentence and any breach of the conditions could land me in the YDC on Guernsey. "Do you have any male clothes?" he asked. I gulped and shook my head, hoping he'd insist my mother get me some. "Well, in that case my advice is that you do everything you can to stay out of the YDC, he said over his glasses, as all the inmates wear their own clothes, he added, defeating my tiniest glimmer of hope. "You'll be expected to report to my office at the town hall every Thursday at 3 p.m, and your community service hours will be arranged in the coming weeks." I looked at him, then to my mother, then to my pale knees and the pleated edge of my pinafore. And what would this community service involve? My mother asked. Anything from clearing dog muck from the school playing fields, parks, and other public spaces, to litter picking on the beaches and coastal paths, nothing taxing nor interesting, he replied, before making it perfectly clear that a breach of the conditions would land me in Guernsey's youth detention centre. That means you are to arrive on time all of the time, you do what you are told when you are told, and you will treat your elders and betters with the utmost respect, he said. I nodded and looked at my knees. Now if you'll excuse us for a moment, I'd like a private word with your mother, Mr. Halsall said. Mum told me to wait in my room, so I got up and left. Mum followed and locked me in. She returned to the sitting room where her son's probation officer shuffled notes and sorted forms. I know this all must seem very unusual, she said as she perched herself opposite Mr. Halsall. Martin dressed as he is, she added for clarity. Well, if you deem this petticoating as being appropriate, then the probation service will abide by your wishes, he interjected. I can get him some more suitable clothes to wear if need be, she suggested. I just haven't had chance yet. Well, I'll leave that decision up to you and his father, our only concern is that he stays out of trouble, he replied. It is intriguing though, he quizzed. She explained that she and her husband had given up on his return months ago, so cleared out his room. We thought about opening a small band B, she smiled wistfully, but then we got the call from the Metropolitan Police in London and here he is, she added with a frown. She reiterated that his clothes were tattered and torn and stunk to high heaven when they brought him back, and seeing as they were only fit for the bin, she had no option but to give him some of her own clothes to wear. She also explained that she'd heard of the concept of petticoating for boys many years ago. It's something I'd have never considered because it seemed really quite cruel, she said, but on reflection, it's only clothing and he took all his own clothes with him when he ran away, she paused for a moment. In a way he's brought it on himself, she added before offering Mr. Halsall a second cup of tea. No thank you, he said, before thanking her for her time. As he was leaving, he paused in the doorway and said, I must say this petticoating could be a wonderful example to other boys his age, we can't have them all trying to leave without seeing what the consequences could be first. Oh, I entirely agree, she said, almost licking his arse. And he's very obedient all of a sudden, she smiled before shaking Mr. Halsall's hand and closing the door. I heard footsteps and the sound of my door being unlocked. I looked at Mother expectantly when she swung the door wide open. Mr. Halsall has gone, so you can continue with your chores, she said. What did he say? I asked. That you have to report to the probation office every Thursday at 3 p.m. and that your hours of unpaid work will be arranged within the next few weeks. I looked down at the drab plaid dress I wore. Oh, he was happy to go along with my wishes, she replied in a matter-of-fact tone. So you may as well get used to it. My head dropped just as quickly as my heart sank. Surely there's some law against this. Surely it's child abuse. It's one thing dressing like this indoors, but if I have to dress like a girl outside too, surely I'd get killed. Okay, maybe a slight over-exaggeration, especially since I let Lisa pass me off as a girl whilst begging in London. Every time I thought about her my heart hung heavy. She was in a dire situation and got me out of experiencing something similar or possibly worse. I wondered if, like me, she was back in her parental home and getting off the drugs. All these thoughts ran through my mind as I dusted and polished the extensive bookshelves which encompassed the large sitting room. It was mid-afternoon when I'd finished dusting and polishing the entire house. Mum had me vacuum all the carpets before mopping the floor tiles I'd spent hours scrubbing the previous day. I pointed this fact out to my mother, who replied with, "They need mopping daily and scrubbing weekly." My head slumped into my collarbones when she said this, but I did as instructed all the same. Mopping was far easier than scrubbing, but I worked up a sweat nonetheless. The next few days were much the same. Mum dug out a few more of her old frocks for me to wear, none of which were very appealing. She found me plenty of chores to do, including weeding the garden, sweeping and scrubbing the path and patio, more laundry and ironing, mopping, helping prepare food and washing up. And each evening I was locked in my room from 8 p.m. till around 7 a.m., which was the most boring part of my daily routine. My walls used to be covered in posters. My desk was home to an old PC. My shelves were full of books, comics, and old toys. A squadron of model planes hung from my ceiling. There's nothing to do or look at except for the sea view from my window, and the small selection of Mum's old dresses which now hung in my wardrobe, but they weren't what I'd call eye candy. I decided to ask my mum if she'd let me take some books into my room. Initially she flat refused, reminding me that entertainment is a privilege I am yet to earn. I told her how boring it is being locked in my room with nothing to do, suggesting that even prisoners would at least be able to read a book. That evening she handed me a small bundle of books. "Thanks, Mum," I said gleefully before she closed and locked my door behind her. My excitement ebbed a little as I read the titles: Anne of Green Gables, Heidi, Mallory Towers, The Secret Garden, The Little Princess and Black Beauty. All girls' books. I sighed before reading the synopsis of each one. A little girl is sent to live with her grumpy grandfather. A little girl is sent to boarding school in London. A little girl this, a little girl that, the story of a horse. At least Black Beauty sounded like it wasn't all about a little girl, so I began reading until my eyes became too tired. Today is the day I was to report to the probation officer. After my chores, Mum said she wanted me to change before we left. "What into?" I asked, hoping she'd produce a pair of jeans and a jumper. But no such offer came. My mother very kindly gave me the choice out of the cast-offs she'd given me. These include a green gingham frock, a burgundy dress with white trim, the plaid pinafore and white blouse combo, a pale blue striped dress, or the only item which wasn't a dress, the sailor-style playsuit. In spite of it having shorts rather than a skirt, it was by far the worst of a bad bunch. I couldn't decide, so Mum decided on the plaid pinafore and white blouse. Mum asked me if I wanted to borrow a pair of tights too, but I refused. It's bad enough having to go into St. Anne's wearing a dress. I'm not going to wear tights too. It took about 15 minutes to walk to the courthouse. My parents gave up their car years ago when we first moved to the island, as it simply wasn't big enough to justify driving. There is however a single taxi, but this was only ever used when the weather dictated. Today was a sunny blustery day, normal weather for Alderney. By the time I'd passed a number of bizarre stares from the islanders, I was eager to get inside the courthouse. The walk of shame wearing one of my mother's old dresses was humiliating enough. The fear of the wind blowing up my short dress and exposing my knickers was petrifying. As we sat inside Mr. Halsall's small office, I could hear the distinct high-pitched voices getting ever louder, signifying that school was out. He asked me how I was filling my time before asking my mother to confirm my reply. "I'm very impressed with how much effort he's putting in actually. I'm struggling to find things for him to do," she commented. From my point of view, she's finding me things to do with great ease. 15 minutes later and the meeting was over. Mr. Halsall told me he'd see me at the same time the following week and wished me well in my search for employment, before uncomfortably glancing at my bare legs and footwear. On the way home, my mother frequently reminded me to take no notice, as many of the school kids recognized me, then ridiculed me for dressing like a girl. As we neared the edge of the small town, we passed a group of schoolgirls who burst out laughing, first at the style of my dress and the ribbons in my hair, and then at my pale hairy legs. "Better get some fake tan on those, Martin," one shouted, and some Imac, another added. I felt my chin begin to go tense and could feel my tear ducts welling up. I tried to hold back my tears for as long as possible. The giggles and taunts from the girls faded into the distance. "You've made me into a laughingstock," I said to my mother before bursting into tears. She didn't give me a hug when we were reunited last week, but today she did. This only made me cry harder, but did little to ease my discomfort. One minute I'm being teased for wearing a dress, the next I'm being comforted by my mother whilst I cry like girl, for all and sundry to see. "Why do I have to dress like this?" I asked as I snivelled the last of my tears. "Can't you see what it's doing to me?" Mum reminded me of my attitude when she and Dad came to collect me from the police station in London. I showed little remorse for the months of worry I'd put them through, and the only regret I showed for the shoplifting was the fact I'd been caught. She asked me if at any point since I arrived home if I'd forgotten I was being punished for my own selfish behaviour. I shook my head. This, she told me, is exactly why I would remain in dresses until she and my father decide otherwise. She also added that I'd get used to it in time, as would the rest of the islanders, and that I was fortunate not to be well built like most other boys my age. I knew I was on the small side and could pass as a girl, something I used to my advantage whilst begging with Lisa in London. However, with everybody on the island knowing I'm a boy and that my dressing as a girl is part of my punishment, the fact that I'm small and skinny with hair long enough to tie in bunches and ribbons is hardly fortunate. Before long we arrived home. Dad emerged from his study and asked how it went. "Okay. I think they were just making sure he's not absconded again," Mum replied. "He did get teased on the way home, which upset him a bit," she added, casting me a sympathetic glance. Dad said he wasn't surprised and shuffled himself back to his study. I asked my mother what she wanted me to do next. To my surprise, she suggested we sit out in the garden. "Maybe get some sun on those legs of yours," she added. "Why don't you put your play suit on?" Although I was perfectly capable of unfastening my paid pinafore myself, Mum followed me to my room and helped with the back zip. I stripped down to my knickers whilst Mum got the play suit out of the wardrobe for me. "Thanks," I said as she passed it to me with the back zip already unfastened. I stepped into it and pushed my arms through the short gathered sleeves. Mum turned me around and fastened the zip. "Thanks," I said once more, turning towards her and shyly looking down at myself. Mum looked me up and down and smiled at me, before glancing at the small selection of books on my shelf. She asked me if I'd started reading any of them, so I told her I was reading Black Beauty. She said she loved that book when she was a girl. I wanted to question why she'd given me a stack of girls' books, but in light of the clothes she was forcing me to wear, I figured I knew the answer. We went out to the garden and Saturday. Mum took in the panoramic sea view whilst I hung my head and gazed at my pale hairy legs. "I must say you're really very ladylike," Mum said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, you always sit with your knees together, even with shorts on," she said with a smile. "It just seems right," I replied, separating them a little. "Oh, it's absolutely right," Mum informed me. She placed her hand on my knee and pushed my legs together again. "I think we should get rid of this hair," she suggested. Her thumb gently stroked my hairy knee. I gulped at the prospect of shaving my legs. "How long will I have to do this for?" I asked. "For as long as is necessary," Mum replied. "If you're thinking it's only going to be a week or two, then think again," she added. "The probation officer wants to make an example of you and is 100% behind you being petticoated, so it'll be at least until you've worked off your community service and paid all of your fines. That could be months," I pessimistically whined. "It could," my mother optimistically replied. I gulped and looked at her with unfavorable eyes. "Oh, it's not that bad," she said. "They're only clothes after all, and at least they're clean and not in tatters." "But they are girls' clothes," I reminded her. "Well, it wouldn't be petticoating if they were boys' clothes, would it?" "I guess." I frowned. "What is all this petticoating anyway?" I asked. "Apart from the obvious," I added, looking down at myself. "I've told you, dressing boys in girls' clothing to help them behave themselves," she replied. "And as far as I can tell, it's certainly working," she said. "I wish I'd done it years ago," she added. I managed to stop myself from blurting why, as the answer is obvious. You must see that it's better to be petticoated here than living rough in London with no friends or family to help you. I had some friends, I stated. But I know what you mean. I sighed. I never wanted to steal, but I didn't know what else I could do. I said. I told her about sleeping rough, staying in squats or kipping down in the arches, having to move on every few days to avoid the more unsavory characters. I told her about having beg and steal when my money ran out. She reminded me it was my father's money. I hung my head in shame. I told her about all the times I'd been robbed from other, tougher street urchins. However, I didn't tell her about Patrick the abusive smackhead, or Justin the rent boy, or Lisa being forced into prostitution. Every time I thought of her, a shudder went down my spine. Well, I think the day you got caught shoplifting was a blessing in disguise. Mum said. I guess. I replied, casting her an uneasy smile. That evening, as I lay on my bed reading, I couldn't help thinking back to the heart-to-heart Mum and I had. It was only when I told her about my experience being homeless that I realized just how dire the situation was. At the time I felt I was getting by okay on my own, albeit by hook or by crook. I took each day as it came and took what I needed. Like a modern-day Oliver Twist, with all the skills of the Artful Dodger but with no Fagin and no gang. I closed my book and sat upright on my bed, pulling my white nightdress over my knees. Its lace-trimmed frilled hem turned my stomach and I wondered why girls like such things. I don't know why, but I stepped over to my wardrobe and opened it. I fanned through my dresses and wondered if I'd ever grow to like their frills, flowers, and bows. Each one felt like a prison, especially those with the back zip fastening that I still struggle with. It could be worse, I figured, casting my mind back to my time in London and the endless possibilities had I not been brought back to Alderney. Given more time, maybe I would have found my brother and lived happily ever after with him. Maybe I didn't get caught shoplifting and my Artful Dodger lifestyle continued. Maybe I didn't leave Lisa and the squat Anne. I dread to think myself.